Welcome to the Line Movement MMA Betting Show. I'm Daniel Levi from Best Fight Picks and Half the Battle, joined now by Dan Tom of MMA Junkie and the Protect Your Neck podcast. Today we're going to be talking UFC on ESPN Plus 39 because Anderson the Spider Silva, he's having his retirement fight against Uriah Hall. And Dan Tom, it's going down this Saturday night. We're back in the Apex, no longer in Fight Island. Now we're back here in Vegas. So this is going to be an interesting fight to send off the legendary Spider.
Yeah, man, I'm happy. You know, the backdrop here doesn't really change too much. Of course, I'm here in the backyard of Vegas, and it feels like it should be a bigger deal that, you know, this is the send-off party for the Silva, but perhaps I'm sure many will argue that send-off party should have already happened. We're in the pandemic era, perhaps that's why. But yeah, I'm getting all the nostalgia stirred up when I'm looking back into this fight, man.
Yeah, I mean, anytime Anderson fights, it's always the same thing. I'm always, trying to replay the past memories, but joining us today, we got a special guest. We got George from MMA Junkie. George, welcome to the Line Movement MMA Betting Show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chop it up with you guys.
The pleasure is all ours. So, gentlemen, let's get right down to business because, as we mentioned, the main event between Anderson Silva and Uriah Hall. And I mean, when you talk about a guy like Anderson Silva, not only does he have the longest title reign in UFC history, he's also got the longest win streak in UFC history with 16 wins. Now, I know Johnny Bones might have something to say about that, but officially, because, the BS that went down with Matt Hamill, plus he had one of his fights overturned. So, on paper, Anderson still got that record, even though between you and me, we know Jones actually has got the longest streak, but let's not take it away from Anderson, and also he's got the most knockdowns in UFC history with 18, has the most knockdowns in UFC title fights with 10, has the most knockouts in UFC title fights with 7. So, I mean, Anderson Silva, such a legend. And I feel like some of the newer fans that just came along, during the McGregor era around 2015, they don't fully appreciate what the Spider brought to the table. But Dan Tom, they've actually been trying to make this Uriah Hall fight happen for a while, and it's finally going down. At least Anderson doesn't have to worry about getting taken down and humped in this fight.
Yeah, it's officially on the books. It's something they tried to put together a few years ago. And even going back, it was kind of funny to watch the intro of his fight for Chris Lieben, and you hear Mike Goldberg saying, Dana White wants him to fight Anderson Silva. So, that's been on the boss man's head for quite some time. I'm really excited about this one. Obviously, we're a betting channel here. Thank you all for subscribing, of course, to Line Movement. Give the video a like while you're at it. Of course, we know you're watching us on the old YouTube, right? But with the odds in mind, just to get the conversation started, am I crazy for being kind of surprised that maybe it wasn't wider? I'm not saying it should be. I'm saying I was surprised that the odds haven't grown a bit wider here.
No, I mean, that's a great point you bring up because obviously Anderson, he is getting up there, but man, Uriah, some of these wins have been like comebacks. He hasn't been dominating these fights start to finish. But George, this is a fight they've been trying to make for a long time. And I know you remember when Uriah Hall was on The Ultimate Fighter and they compared him to Anderson Silva. They said this is a young Anderson Silva. Now, at first, it didn't quite play out that way, but now, I mean, look, he still has a knockout win over Mosies. He still knocked out Jocko. He still has some highlight reel wins along the way. But what do you think about this matchup stylistically?
When the fighter gets that type of a label, the next somebody, I think Rose was going to be the next Rousey. Sometimes that's a lot of pressure for some of these younger fighters because we're comparing them to actual icons of the sport. So it doesn't surprise me when they come up short how much it can affect them. But you pointed out some good ones, Dan, some good flashy wins that he had. But one that stood out to me was Antonio Carlos Jr. because I think in that one, he was going to have to show off the skills of, am I an all-around mixed martial artist? Because striking, he can dance with anybody. But when it comes to blending all the arts, when it comes to getting taken down and getting your energy sapped and then being able to stand again and fire off, kicks and knees and punches, your energy bar goes down. So that one impressed me a lot. I think Uriah Hall really is the real deal, but he had to put in the work. He had to shake things up a little bit. He actually left Las Vegas and moved to Fortis MMA. Got a new group of training partners, got out of his comfort zone, and now I think you can say this guy's a contender at middleweight. Now, is he ready for the top heap? I don't know, because he's got to pass these tests along the way. This one's different. This one's like him. He's fighting his idol. He can't get too caught up in the moment. There'll be time to appreciate Anderson when the fight is over, you can say all your kind things then. But right now, he's got to treat it like a business transaction and go out there and get a win against the guy who isn't what he once was. But when he's flowing, I mean, look, there was some times where I could tell Izzy was like, uh-oh, here we go. You know, he was trying to make sure that he stayed in the moment as well. So I'm pumped up about the fight. I love the resurgence of Uriah Hall and what he's done again since joining Fortis MMA, and I'm gonna appreciate every moment of Anderson Silva's last fight.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up some great points. I definitely agree that the best version of Uriah Hall is the one that's training at Fortis MMA. That cannot be debated. But Dan, Tom, another great point that George brought up is the respect factor here. Because, I mean, this is a guy that Uriah Hall didn't just grow up admiring. I'm sure he had a poster of him in his bedroom wall. You know what I mean? So do you think that Uriah Hall, and because look, there's a couple different ways to look at it. Some people say when they fight their idols, they're going to, quote unquote, show them respect by bringing the best possible version of themselves on fight night. Do you think that's going to be what Uriah Hall does, or do you think he's going to be in the center of the octagon, you know, asking for a selfie, trying to get a signed T-shirt? What do you think the deal is going to be here? What's his approach?
Man, Dan, you knew exactly where I was going, but I really like the word that George used as far as business transaction, because I think that's the key, right? You know, you're right. There is two ways to look at it, but the two aspects I wanted to bring up in relation to that is, you know, does he treat it like the business transaction that George beautifully put? I think that's the right approach, right? Because, yeah, you're right. We've seen Anderson Silva, to your point, Dan, con these younger fighters, even the great Israel Adesanya, which is why even though I picked Izzy to win, I said it was by decision, and that seemed crazy to people. The fact that it went to decision still seems crazy to people, but it doesn't to me. We've seen this effect. You know what I'm talking about, Dan. You spoke and set it up beautifully right there. But the other aspect I guess I would bring up, guys, it's something that, you know, we've talked about, Dan. I've definitely been wrong about it on the right side and the wrong side, so I'm not going to pretend to have a definitive answer, but we do bring it up on the show because I think it's worth noting, which is fighters with that performance anxiety. I only bring it up because the fighters themselves have been more, willing to bring it up in recent years, whether it's, you know, seeing, performance coaches, psych coaches, head coaches, whatever you want to call it. I believe that, you know, like the Jack Hermansons of the world, Uriah Hall is another guy who's been really open. You know, he really needs everything clicking, and something in this pandemic era to think about: a lot less media, a lot less anxiety. As far as those things go, there's still travel and COVID and all that stuff. I don't know how Uriah Hall or the fighters react to that. But as far as fight day obligations, I feel like there's a lot less to deal with. They can go in there, they can fight, and they can do business. But I'm not all that confident, if I'm being honest, guys, even though tipping my hand, I am picking Hall to win. I'm not all that confident that he's not asking for autographs in there, Dan.
And real quick, I forgot to mention up top, we got to let our Canadian listeners know to go to blitzbet.eu. And the reason I bring this up is because you look at the line movement and go to linemovement.com, follow us at line_movement, subscribe to this video right now. And Uriah Hall opened -180. And now it just got steamed all the way to -230. So someone just put a big bet on Uriah Hall. Now, George, I mean, you brought up the fact that, hey, look, he's definitely got respect for him, but do you think he's going to be showing him a lot of respect in the cage? I know at the weigh-ins he's going to shake his hand. I know after the fight they're going to have a nice moment, but in the fight, do you think Uriah Hall is going to come at him violently, or do you think it's going to kind of be like a little bit of a sparring match?
I think within the context of the rules, yes, Uriah will be looking to knock his block off. However, in every sport that you can think of, people are always doing something to get some sort of an edge, you know, like holding somebody's jersey in football or even basketball, a nice little elbow in soccer. There's a lot of things you can do. And I don't know if Uriah Hall's going to step over that line per se, but man, Dan also used a good word. Dan Tom used a good word about the con job. And so how much will Hall get caught up during fight week in the fact that he's fighting his idol, the fact that he's fighting a legend who's probably getting a lot of shine because it is his last fight. By the way, he's got 2 fights left on the contract, but apparently he agreed to make this the final one, and that's it. That's something between him and the UFC. But Anderson can do it at any time. He can do it during fight week when he runs into you and grabs both your hand with 2 hands and bows, smiles at you, you know, and then pastes you on Saturday night. He can do it at the weigh-ins where he'll walk up, same thing, smile to Dana, wink at the ring card girls, and then he gets right up in your face or he'll even do it during the fight. The only time I saw someone throw him off his game was old Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz kind of was playing games, and Nick Diaz was being respectful during fight week, and then all of a sudden he's laying and getting a suntan and egging him on. But Anderson was able to shake that off. So Uriah Hall can't get caught up in that, because if he does, it might make the difference. He has to make sure that he's willing to go a little bit further than just the boundary lines of the sport. And I'm not suggesting anything dirty, like poking them in the eyes or nothing. I'm just saying doing whatever it takes, to inflict pain and damage and get out of there with the win, because Anderson will do it to you. He is a gangster.
Yes, he is. Greatest fighter of all time. I know officially, we can talk Khabib, we can talk John Jones, but I'm so biased towards Anderson Silva, so he'll always have my fullest respect. Now, Dan Tom, it's prediction time. So, look, I mean, I get why Uriah Hall's favored on paper. Look, he's 10 years younger. He's the guy that still has more to accomplish. What is there left for Anderson to prove? I mean, he's done it all. Like, I know officially it says DJ has the title defense record, but that's because Travis Lutter fucked over Anderson Silva by missing weight. Anderson should have that record right now, but Travis Lutter missed weight. And, back then, they didn't count it as a title fight when the opponent misses weight. Nowadays, if a guy misses weight, it's still a title fight for the guy that makes weight. But back then, it was just a non-title bout. So that totally screwed over Anderson from having the most title defenses in UFC history. But in my book, Dan Tom, he's got the most title defenses in UFC history. So prediction time. I mean, all right, basically, what kind of respect is Uriah Hall going to show him inside that cage? Is this going to be a violent performance, or is this going to be a respectful sparring match?
Well, because of the reasons we were talking about, I was totally tempted to pick it, Hall by decision, kind of like I did with the Israel Adesanya versus Silva fight. But the Izzy and Silva fight was only 3 rounds, even when it got moved to main event status last minute, where this is more the traditional, I guess, of modern times main event. This is going to be 5-round, folks. And couple that, not just those numbers, it was the leg kick numbers that surprised me. I know Hall's got an active jab. I like that, one of the things about being at Team Fortress MMA is Coach Safe's got him back on that jab. That's going to be great. But all iterations of Hall, the one thing he's had in common is it's not uncommon for him to land anywhere from 20 to 30 leg kicks in a 3-round fight. Now that he's got 5 rounds, now that he's got a guy like Anderson Silva, and again, I think he even landed 20 to 30 against like Yotko, like other southpaws. So the stance won't dissuade him. He's 2-2 against southpaws. I think just the leg kicks alone is what pushes me to picking Hall inside the distance here. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes past the 3rd round, but I'm just going to say round 3. Anderson's legs will be in bad shape by then.
George, I mean, you think Anderson can muster up one last performance, go out on top, have that nice speech, leave his gloves in the center of the octagon, and make us all happy?
I think so. Anderson has so much experience. I think he knows how to manage his energy output. And when he smells blood, he goes for it. When he knows he needs to coast a little bit, he will. I think he can. I don't think he's ever too concerned about like stealing rounds or anything, because I think he's always confident that at some point he's going to ice you. That said, I love gravitating towards underdogs in this sport. And I'll take Anderson because I guess he's tugging at the heartstrings a little bit. I still feel like he's got some skills. They don't come out every second of every round, but they do come out. And when they do, they're dangerous. And again, Uriah Hall, he's passed some tests along the way. This is a different type of test. If he can pass it, then yeah, of course, the more as you keep passing these tests, the more serious we'll take you as a contender. But I'm going to side with Anderson Silva on this one. If Uriah Hall wins, I'm not shocked, but I still think that Anderson Silva's got something here. And look, guys, maybe sometimes I just hold on a little bit of those memories from Pride. We're running out of these legends in the UFC. So I guess it's a little bit of an emotional pick. So at least I want to be transparent about that. But I think Anderson gets it done one way or another. And I think it's going to be a finish, because I think a decision will go in the favor of Uriah Hall.
Man, so I'm just going to tell the fans right now, do not listen to me on this one. Because, I mean, look, obviously I agree that Uriah should be favored just because of the 10-year age gap and all that stuff. But, like, I'm not going to sit here and disrespect the Spider and pick against him with Uriah Hall, man. I know Uriah's probably going to end up winning this fight, but listen, I got to go with the legend, the Spider. I mean, this is a guy that when we used to watch him, because, you know, when we talk about all these other dominant champions, we can just look at numbers in terms of title defenses or wins or this or that. But when you talk about the Spider, it was the performances. I mean, he was like a virtuoso out there. He was putting on master classes. Like, I still to this day have never seen a performance like he put on versus Forrest Griffin. I still to this day have never seen a performance like Anderson Silva versus Chris Lieben, like Anderson Silva's title-winning effort against Rich Franklin, the subsequent title defense against Rich Franklin in the rematch in Cincinnati, by the way, Dan Tom. And I mean, this guy, the front kick against Vitor, he literally changed the game. He's an innovator. He's a pioneer. So obviously I'm being completely emotional. That's why you shouldn't tail me on this one. But I want to see him go out here. And look, if they have to have the little sparring match where they shake hands every 5 seconds and, you know, they're smiling, like, you know, and they're doing all that bullshit, as long as it goes towards Anderson, I'm good with that. You know what I mean? But like, I'm hoping that like if Uriah drops Anderson, that like he helps him back up, you know, that he doesn't go for the follow-up or anything like that, because we don't want to see the legend get hurt. And then I'm also hoping that, you know, Anderson's legs can stay together, because after that Weidman fight, after the Jared Cannonier fight, we know it quite hasn't been the same, man. I'm sure that after you go through a leg break like that, it's impossible to get back to 100%. So hopefully Uriah just kind of stares at him, asks for that selfie, asks for that autograph. I'm going to go with Anderson Silva to go out on top with a dub, and I cannot wait for this retirement speech.
The more fist bumps are happening, the more that you'll know that Anderson Silva's winning. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope you guys are right.
Yeah, I hope so too. But, you know, we can't get our hopes up because, you know, there's not too many happy endings in this sport. I mean, look, you look back at like Chris Lytle, and that was the perfect retirement, you know, against Dan Hardy. He went out there. He let everybody know in advance, hey, this is my last fight. Let's go out on a bang. And that's exactly what he did. Put on a fight of the night, got a submission of the night at the time. This was before performance of the night. He got submission of the night, went out with 2 bonuses, and you know, he never came back to MMA. He did some bare knuckle boxing, but that's a different story. You know, get paid. I respect it, but he never came back to MMA. He knew when to say when. And real quick, before we move on to the co-main event, I want to ask y'all's opinion on this. So, on the topic of quote unquote tarnishing a legacy, because I'm very curious about y'all's input on this, because you look at a guy like BJ Penn, who's one of my all-time favorite fighters, and I feel like the fans don't talk about when he was lightweight champion. They don't talk about when he was welterweight champion. They don't talk about when he went up to 205 and fought Machida. They don't talk about all the great things that he accomplished. They only talk about how he's on a 7-fight skid. So is the fact that he's on that skid, does that tarnish what he accomplished in the past? And the reason I bring that up is because Anderson started off his UFC career 16-0. He accomplished all the accolades I brought up, but now he's 2-5 in his last 7. And a lot of the newer fans, they weren't around for the golden days, so they don't quite appreciate it like we do. So George, I mean, I know guys like us and Dan Tom will always remember him for the glory days, the prime days, but what's your opinion on quote unquote tarnishing a legacy? Is there such thing as doing that, or are we only going to look back at the good times?
Hell no. The legacy stands. And I'll tell you guys a story right quick that I think can maybe help make my point. You know, I've grown up with a lot of heroes in a lot of different sports that I've watched, you know, and the younger generation, I think, has a little bit more of an opportunity to be in touch with some of the athletes through different ways, you know, social media, gaming, things like that. You know, like when I was growing up, you didn't really know where the players were staying. Right now, everybody knows where, you know, Trump is staying and Kamala Harris. They're both in Vegas right now. You can find that out quickly. But I saw Roberto Duran at the Mandalay Bay. I was going to an Amir Khan fight, and I was with Stitch Duran, the noted cut man in boxing, and he was just a fan that day. So I was going with him, and I see Roberto Duran, and words couldn't come out of my mouth. I kind of just grabbed Stitch's arm. I did that deal, you know, the head nod. And he goes, "Hey, it's Roberto Duran." So he went up to him, and they know each other. And they talked real quick. And then I told him, I go, "Hey," I kind of gave Stitch yet another look, like, which means introduce me, you know? And so he goes, "Hey, Roberto, come back here," you know? And so I was starstruck. And it was really, really cool because I've seen this guy in all kinds of battles. It brought me back to my childhood and watching fights with my parents. Anyway, let me fast forward on this story. The point is, forget about all the losses at the end of his career. His legacy had already stood. He had already acquired all those belts, all those pay-per-views, the fights with Hagler and Leonard especially. You can't erase that from my head. That guy was a legend, and I was ready to shake his hand and take a pic. You know, I was more excited than if I were to see somebody like Mayweather. I mean, who's cool and all that, undefeated, never lost, but that doesn't matter to me as much. It's what the athlete can create for you in that moment. You will retain it. Those losses should not go away. Otherwise, then maybe you're not a true fan, honestly, because I don't see it that way, and that goes for all the athletes, that experience that eventual downfall.
Yeah, I mean, look, I still view Fedor in the same light as when he was on that, 30
Right?
plus fight win streak. So yeah, I feel where you're coming from. Dan, Tom, any closing words on this topic?
Man, George nailed it so much there with that example. That's beautiful. The only thing I'll add is just rounding it back to the MMA version. You mentioned BJ Penn and Anderson Silva, and as well as Fedor at the end there. I feel like I made a case, for where I stand, but even I'm guilty, guys, of not giving the Anderson Silvas or the Fedors, who I'm a fan of and still a fan of, by the way. I'm even guilty of that myself. I will say, though, what they all have in common to support why you shouldn't say that the losses tarnish their legacy, not just because, again, from Ali to Duran, they all had those later stages that no one cares about anymore. But with Silva, Penn, and Fedor, Fedor's management was one thing, sure, that prevented a lot of matchups. But in general, these were guys that fought the bigger men. They weren't afraid to take the challenges. They fought the nobodies. They fought the no names. BJ was the first guy to say Frank Yeager was going to be champion. He told it to Mike Straka of Fox. He called it before any of us did. And when, they promoted, you want to go to Abu Dhabi before this pandemic happens? Like, we don't have to go there. We're just going to go there and you're going to fight a no name, have nothing to give. BJ Penn was like, sure. I mean, say what you will about Connor or any of these other guys, like, you got to pull teeth just to get people to take fights these days. So keep that in mind when you want to knock these guys off for their losses. They had the cojones to put themselves in that position in the first place. And that's my end.
I mean, the famous quote from BJ Penn, I know you guys know what it is, just scrap. So I agree when you say that times have definitely changed. So great stuff, guys. Co-main event of the evening, we got Andre Fili taking on Bryce Mitchell, and I think you guys know the deal here. Look, Bryce Mitchell, he's the hot prospect. He's a specialist. His grappling is serious. I've been very impressed, but Andre Fili kind of presents that litmus test, kind of, gatekeeper to the top 20 type ordeal, and you pass that test, you're going to go on to do some big things, and Fili is very well-rounded. I mean, like, you've seen what happens when guys aren't quite ready for the Fili test. You saw what happened with Shaman Moraes. You see what happens with some of these other guys. Fili is very, very impressive when you're not quite ready. But when you are ready, Dan, Tom, I mean, you see what a guy like Calvin Kattar can go out there and do. You see what a guy like Yair Rodriguez, Sodiq Yusuff. So the big question here is, and obviously we're going to break this fight down in depth, but the big question is Bryce Mitchell on that level yet or not?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Calvin Kattar, because looking at the stats, I don't have it right in front of me, but just recently researching this fight, I think Kattar was like the last guy to take Fili down, I believe, officially. And, you were on the right side of that one, Dan. Props to you. But the majority of us, like me, were on the wrong side. We were backing Fili. We weren't quite aware of who Calvin Kattar was. So that obviously is shown to be no coincidence. So obviously it's nothing we can, crucify Fili, whether you're picking him in this spot or not picking him in this spot. I just like that you mentioned Calvin Kattar there. But yeah, man, it's a really interesting fight. I believe the line is closed for a reason. Even though I may be siding with the more proven product here, I'm not super confident in my pick here. I'm a bit surprised to see who is favored, if that gives away, who I'm picking. But I'm a bit surprised, to see that, Mitchell is favored. But I think money is and will come in on him before fight time for a reason. I mean, this kid's got something special. Is it special enough to beat Fili? We'll find out. But the kid certainly got something special about him.
Definitely. George, I mean, not only is this kid Bryce Mitchell a specialist, but he's also the first man in UFC history to get his own custom-made shorts. He's got the camo shorts, going to rock them on fight night. I mean, you think he's on the level to come out here and defeat a guy like Fili?
Yeah, I heard about the camo shorts. I'm really excited for him. He asked for it. He was persistent. They gave them to him. So good for him. I can only imagine that probably put him in a nice state of mind going into this fight. Andre Fili, he's what we call, I guess, a tough out. And, he's proven it against Jury, Bermudez, Hakran Diaz. Back in the day, those guys were ranked. They were somebody. You look back now, years later, you're like, well, are you sure about that? But same thing. But he also got tripped up by fighters who are now reciting in the top 10, like Youssef and Cater. And you guys brought up. I'm not even going to go far back, like all the way to Max Holloway, but still, I'm talking about in recent times, something's holding him back from taking that next step. When he wins, it's a decision, sometimes a split even. Sometimes I question his fight IQ, or maybe he just doesn't have the power and he's got to be, a volume type guy. He sometimes gets hit, but look, all that aside, it's going to boil down to the Mitchell coming out of tough, loses to Fili. The Mitchell I've seen in the last couple fights against Rosa, and I think the guy before him was Sales. Wow, relentless. Now you don't really question his cardio. Although in the Rosa fight, he was in such control that I don't even know that we had a chance to really see what his cardio would be like. He was so much in top position and things like that. But I think Mitchell what impresses me the most is those improvements he's made between those first two fights coming out of tough and then the last two fights coming out of tough. So I think Fili probably deserved to be the favorite, and I would normally jump on that, but I'm scared because I feel like Mitchell just showed me in his last couple fights, hey man, I'm next level. I haven't lost for a reason. And Fili, look, I bet a lot, guys, and I don't win a lot. So do the opposite of what I say. But Fili's let me down a few times. So I just kind of stay away from that cat a little bit. And I'm going to ride the Mitchell train.
I'm with you there, man. I'll tell you why. I think you brought up some great points about the first two UFC fights. Kind of he was getting his feet wet, so to speak. And now, I mean, these last two performances, I've been like, holy shit, like who's this guy? And I feel like this is gonna be his coming out party on Saturday night. Look. His last two fights were on the prelims. Now he's got a co-main event. He's got his own custom shorts. And we've seen time and time again with Andre Fili. Look, he's a very well-rounded fighter, no doubt about it. But the up-and-comers that are going to move to the top 15 always beat him. But the kind of middling guys don't beat him. I don't view Bryce Mitchell as a middling guy. I mean, he was born in 1994. He's just a kid, I don't even know what it means to be born in the 90s. So I think that I've been so damn impressed with Bryce Mitchell, his control on the mat, his creativity, going out there with the second twister in UFC history after the Korean Zombie. And, performances like that and the dominance he displayed against Charles Rosa, it doesn't go unnoticed in my eyes. And when I need proof that Andre Fili can not only be taken down, but he can be held down, I mean, let's just look one fight ago against Sodiq Yusuff. I know you guys remember that Kimura attempt. I know you guys remember when Sodiq Yusuff spent the majority of one of the rounds on top. But we take it, further back. And guys like Yair Rodriguez, who, I mean, we know him for his amazing, unpredictable kicks, the flying knees, the whole bit. And he ended up knocking him out with a flying kick. But no one talks about how Yair Rodriguez was out there blast doubling Andre Fili. So I think when these non-wrestlers, I think the fact that they're able to come out here and do that, it gives me confidence that a guy like Bryce Mitchell, who's a specialist, can do it too. And you want to go back, and I hate to bring up petty examples. And when I say petty examples, I mean, talking about stuff from like half a decade ago, because I do believe in that these fighters improve, no doubt about it. But I mean, I know you remember Godofredo Pepe going out there and submitting Andre Fili in the first round. I know you remember Max Holloway submitting Andre Fili. So we know he can be submitted. We know he can be taken down. We know he can be held down. So I think this is a good matchup for Bryce Mitchell. I think he's going to come out here and show more of his dominance on the mat, Dan, Tom.
Yeah, man, this is a fight where, again, peeling back the curtain pre-show, this is one of those fights where I said this might be one where I reserve the right to my pick. And I can't even blame not having my ducks in a row, coming to the program or anything, because this is honestly a fight, guys, where I feel like my decision would be plagued anyways. I'm with George here. Sometimes we have fighters that we have really bad reads on, and Bryce Mitchell is one for me. You know, he's undefeated, but then he's also lost to a guy like Brad Katona, who's another guy who I've been so wrong on. Like, I just underestimate these guys, you know. It's just usually something I don't do, especially for the reasons of whether they're being weird like Mitchell or they're a babyface cat individual like Katona. Like, I'm sympathetic to both those things, but yet for whatever reason, I can't help but count both these guys out. I can't help but question how they have success. But yes, you know what? Mitchell did blow me away. He is a new guy. And he should be. He's young. He's putting things together. You heard in the corners where they were thrown off. Like, this guy was coming out southpaw for a majority of his career. He comes out orthodox and he's setting up his shots different. He's working with wrestling crews in new Division I programs down in Arkansas. So even though he's staying in Arkansas, he's not without resources. Whereas Fili, I guess the reason why I'm picking them, or maybe you guys are convincing me here, by the way, full disclosure, to change my pick, is because people forget about Fili's wrestling. It was a reason why I picked him to beat Bermudez, and I believe he showed that. Bermudez, actually, not Cater, was technically the last person to take him down, but that was a high-paced war, and it wasn't until like a very late takedown at the very end of the third round was the one takedown that Bermudez, one of the best, both statistically and credential takedown artists in the history of that entire division. Now, before or after, we haven't seen him face very many specialists, aside from, as you guys mentioned, Godofredo Pepe. So, you know, maybe it's the underrated wrestling. And what we saw with Tyler Diamond, even though he didn't have that experience, he used the wrestling rides and certain things that Fili was using in his last fight. And those kind of things tend to shut down jiu-jitsu guys. So if that's what Fili means by shout out to James Lynch and the Octagon Outlook show, as far as, you know, him citing his worry about Fili saying, I'll go to the ground with Mitchell. However, I do side with James in theory that, like, do you really want to go to the ground with Mitchell? You know, I go to Fili's Instagram. He's working with guys like Gary Tonin. Not bad idea, right? But however, how many times have we seen that where the guy works with a boxing coach and he forgets about his wrestling, or he works with a jiu-jitsu coach and he forgets about his boxing, right? So it's a really weird kind of play there. Fili has improved his tactics, but to something George said, he still makes strategic, questionable, you know, decisions to fight IQ. So that's maybe the thing that why you might want to pick a more proven, straightforward process like Mitchell. Mitchell's definitely the safer pick here, and I may end up changing my pick. So that's all I got.
But I mean, look, if you do want to take Fili, it makes sense that he's the more well-rounded guy. He's the more experienced guy. And also, no one is exempt from that first L. And while you did bring up the Brad Katona loss, which doesn't officially count on his record because it was on the Ultimate Fighter, the way I would defend it would just be, you know, firstly, it was almost 3 years ago. But secondly, I would say that, look, Brad Katona also beat Kyler Phillips on that season of the Ultimate Fighter. I think it was simply a case where he caught both those prospects at the right time before they had truly developed. And if they ever ran it back, I think we know what would happen, but he caught them at the right time. So I can't take that win away. I just think that it was just one of those cases, you know, right place, right time type ordeal. But yeah, I'm going Bryce Mitchell. Let's see what happens Saturday night, gentlemen.
Yeah, and you know, Fili's also got like a 4-inch reach advantage. So I'm curious to see if he can stop these takedowns, because I think he bats like 70% takedown defense. If he can stop those takedowns and if he can fight smart and probably win on points, you know, can that reach come into play?
Yeah, I'm very curious to find out. Let's see. Yeah. So featured bout in the middleweight division, we got Kevin Holland taking on Makhmud Muradov. And guys, I'm so excited for this fight because obviously, you know, I've been very high on both guys. I actually cashed on both of them in their last fights, and now they're meeting each other. And, you know, interestingly enough, it actually opened with Makhmud Muradov as a slight favorite. Now Kevin Holland is a slight favorite here. He even got bet up all the way to -200, but now some action has been coming back in on Makhmud Muradov. Now we see Kevin Holland around the -140 mark. So a lot of two-way action on this fight. And George, I mean, obviously we know about Kevin Holland, one of the most exciting guys in the middleweight division, but this kid, Makhmud Muradov, interestingly enough, he's actually the first MMA fighter that Floyd Mayweather has ever represented. And he's put his best foot forward, going 2-0 in his first 2 starts, George.
Yeah, you know, I really, really like Kevin Holland because he's one of those fighters that makes it look easy at times. You know, in basketball, I think what makes the superstars stand out from the above average players is everything's in slow motion to them. So with Kevin Holland, sometimes on the feet, I get that feeling from him, and he's got this 3-fight win streak. He's got a lot of swag. He's fearless in there. He's been in there with Maheta Santos, for crying out loud, and it didn't even look like it phased him. Whereas I think most of us wouldn't even enter the octagon if we had a baseball bat against Maheta Santos. But Kevin Holland, I don't know, man. I just don't know if he's taking those steps like what we described with Thug Nasty a little while ago, where he's just kind of like really, really improving and doing it quickly. With Kevin Holland, I'm not sure if that's there just yet. I really, really want to back him because I feel like if he just stands there and coming off what he felt, and I think most of us felt, was that disappointing win. The most recent one, was it Stewart, I think?
Yeah.
You could tell something was bugging him, and that's why he wanted to correct it. And a lot of these guys are taking like 3-4 fights, all in like a block of a year, 8 months, 5 months. I think Bobby Greene's had 4 fights in 4 days. But like seriously, I want to go with Holland on this one, but I'm thinking you said the line switched though, because I was just trying to do a quick refresh right now, and I show Holland as the favorite, right?
Yeah, he's currently the favorite. It actually opened Mahmoud Murdov's slight favorite.
Yeah. Okay. Oh man, I really want to back Holland here, but I still feel like I need to see more fights from him as far as him being a more quality middleweight, I guess, to support the odds showing him as a favorite. So I might go with Muradov. I think I might go with Muradov. I'm anxious to hear what Dan has to say. And by the way, this might be the last time I do the show. I didn't know I was going to be playing blackjack with the MIT guys. You guys know all kinds of stats. You guys are going back 10 years. It's amazing, man. Seriously, props to you guys. I love this. And I'm joking, obviously, but yeah, when Jordan was telling me about the show, I went and started checking out the line movement. And man, you guys do an excellent job. Seriously, anybody that wants to back these fighters by shoving their chips in and making bets, you got to catch this show because these guys cover every single fine detail. I'm very impressed, fellas.
Thank you so much, George. And just to, play off a couple of the points you brought up, you said that you want to see more improvements from Kevin Holland fight to fight. And I think one of the reasons that we kind of haven't is because he doesn't take too much time off between fights. And I think I've heard a lot of fighters talk about how, when you're just taking these fights back to back, you're not really learning new techniques. You're kind of just maintaining, you're kind of just staying in shape. Whereas if you would take, 6 months off, then he'd have a nice solid 3-4 months to just work on new techniques and add new wrinkles to his game. And to take it a step further, because you did bring up how the Darren Stewart fight wasn't his most impressive fight. I mean, guys, I saw him go into that fight with 2 knee braces. So, these guys don't like to disclose their injuries, but if you just put 2 and 2 together, I've never seen Holland with a knee brace before. Then all of a sudden he's got 2 knee braces on, and I bet on him in that fight. And when he walked inside the octagon, I was like, oh shit. I noticed that right away. I was like, fuck, so he's injured. And then he goes out there, doesn't have his best performance. So I think those are fantastic points. But Dan, Tom, Muradov, he's a well-rounded guy. He's got some serious boxing for MMA standards. How you see this one playing out?
Yeah, man, it's so weird. And thanks, George, for the nice comments there. But this one's a weird one. This is another one for full disclosure, guys. I'm definitely reserving my right to change my pick. I'm midway through retaping right now, rewatching some tape on that last Holland fight, and I totally forgot that too, but was on the same board because I as well was on Kevin Holland. Again, shout out to linemovement.com. You guys know that Kevin Holland, along with another fighter we'll be talking about, have been very good to the line movement family here. So, I was on him too, but I was really worried because even in rewatching that first round, it wasn't just my initial read. I remember tweeting this out live, was that he looked off balance from the first shots too. Darren Stewart, so you mix that in with Darren Stewart's a guy who a lot of people, including myself, by the way, have mistakenly underrated his improvements. And so you had a really good Darren Stewart and you got a really questionable Kevin Holland. So it's a really tricky sample size. And so is a tricky sample size as Muradov. He does have some serious boxing. He's a Mayweather guy. How the heck does he get the Uzbek, connection? And it must be a real connection. The guy's on Instagram flossing a Bentley. I don't think he's making that off of, going into his 3rd UFC fight on the undercard, folks. I don't think the UFC's paying him Bentley worthy money. No offense, UFC. So it's like, what is the connection with this guy? And I pull up his profile that our colleague there, John Morgan, sends me, and I'm like, there's no boxing on here. There's no, I grew up during this. And he even says in his own profile, he goes, my martial arts background's really weird. I grew up working hard. I had to go to Russia to work at a certain point in my life. But whether I was in Russia or not, I was always training martial arts. He never specifies any ranks, couldn't find anything on any experience. Yet he's got this well-rounded skill set. He's got massive connections. So it's a really tricky fight. I officially, George can verify or call me out as he chooses. I officially submitted my pick as Kevin Holland here. But part of me may change it because Makhmudmuradov also has his own attitude intangibles. He likes a little trash talking back and forth, so I don't know if that's really going to bother him. Whereas Kevin Holland is a fighter who his trash talking style comes to life in this pandemic era. However, I will note, I noticed something is Kevin Holland is undefeated going back to Victor Reina against Southpaws. He's not facing a Southpaw here. So I may, to steal a term from Daniel Levy, max bet the next time Holland is against a Southpaw. But boy, am I not sure if he's going to pull away. I could see Muradov getting a decision here, guys. But so far, my pick's going to be Holland.
Yeah, and one more thing real quick. Sorry, Dan, to cut you off. He's also given up a 6-inch reach advantage. And maybe I'm old school or whatever, but I really gravitate towards that. And Dan Tom's obviously put it in my head as well. Those southpaws, man, in MMA, how difficult they are to prepare for. So there's a few things that I jump to, but that 6-inch reach advantage, that can be troublesome, You guys nailed it. Muradov has clean boxing. So again, I'll probably wind up just sticking with Holland because I think I've just become a Kevin Holland fan. I would not be shocked if Muradov won, and if Muradov's odds get even higher, then I'm probably just gonna bet him, regardless, because he can definitely win this fight. Man, even though he's only had a few fights in the UFC, he's won like 13 in a row, and any way you dissect that nowadays in MMA, I mean, you're doing something right, especially if you keep it going once you enter the big leagues.
Well said. So you brought up how this guy's driving a Bentley, and listen, this is a very well-connected individual. I mean, I know you noticed when some of these Russians get wins, and not saying that he's a Russian, but just, as an example, some of the Russians go out there, get wins. The next Monday, they're posting their new Mercedes on IG. So I think it's one of those situations, you know what I mean, Dan Tom? But as far as this matchup is concerned, so initially, when I saw the big dog odds on Muradov, because he was like plus 175 to plus 200 at first, and I was like, well, shit, I love Kevin Holland, but, money's got no friends, so I was thinking about taking the dog shot. But now that all the action's been coming in on Muradov, and I actually went and watched the tape, while I do think that Muradov's got very clean hands for MMA standards, I'm kind of worried that he gets out-volumed in this spot, kind of gets outworked slightly. And even though the stats actually officially say that Muradov throws more than Kevin Holland, I think that those stats might be slightly skewed just because we got a smaller sample size with only 2 fights. And he fought Trevor Smith, where, I respect Trevor Smith a lot. I know you remember his fight with Ed Herman back in the day, fight of the night, but Trevor Smith isn't exactly known for moving his head. Trevor Smith isn't exactly known for his defense. Trevor Smith didn't have a big reach advantage over Muradov. Kevin Holland does, and Kevin Holland is very good at staying on the outside, using that length, and kind of playing that long man game, making you swing at air, going out there, using the jabs, the teeps, the front kicks, the whole bit. And I think that he can kind of come out here, win 2 of the 3 rounds just by slightly edging him. But I definitely am going to be worried anytime that Muradov lets his hands go. It's going to be like, Kevin, you know what I mean? So we just we can't go too big in this spot, but I do slightly favor Kevin Holland here, gentlemen.
Yes, one last thing I'll bring up. The long man thing is good, and he does have a 6-inch reach advantage. However, when I brought out profiles that Holland does well against, I tried to look at the common thread of all his losses. And the one common thread, although there's a different gentleman, is that they are all pretty long fighters. Curtis Melender, Thiago Santos. You go down to Lovato Jr., granted, was a specialist, and that was early on. Brendan Allen. And maybe when he doesn't feel like he has that long man kind of advantage, perhaps there could be something there. He's 6'3" compared to Makhmudmuradov 6'2", 75.55 and a half inch reach under Kevin Holland's 81-inch reach. So, I mean, it's really interesting, man. I think that no matter what side you're on, I don't know how confident you can be on. So good luck. But so far I'm sticking to my So far, I'm sticking to my Kevin Holland side here.
So, gentlemen, next up in the heavyweight division, we got a matchup between Greg Hardy and Maurice Greene. And obviously, right now, they got Greg Hardy around the minus 330 mark. So he's a big favorite here. And listen, I cashed in on Maurice Greene his last fight. Initially, I wasn't going to bet him, but when you saw Jean Vellante show up pregnant to the weigh-ins, weighing in at 265 pounds, I couldn't help myself. I laid the chalk on Maurice Greene. And I got to tell you what, it wasn't sweat-free at all. I mean, look, I thought he clearly won the first 2 rounds, but in that 3rd round, he got dropped. And I know officially it's an arm triangle from bottom, but Dan, Tom, you know firsthand that it was really a tap due to exhaustion. And I gotta say this on a side note, did you see that they matched up Jean Vellante with Jake Collier? And even though I know that's gonna be like a funny fight and haha, this and that, but I'm kind of pissed that they didn't give them both to prospect so we can go out there and max bet the prospect in both fights. Instead, we got to, roll the dice and see who wins between Jean Vellante and Jay Collier. But back to this fight, I think that Greg Hardy, despite him being a big favorite, is actually a very underrated fighter because of all the other outside the cage bullshit. He doesn't get the respect he deserves for the fighter that he is. And I feel like he's a guy that's been developing every single time we've seen him. I feel like when you saw him on Contender Series and it was, an under a minute knockout, so people thought he was knockout or bust. Well, now he's going out there, he's winning decisions, and I feel like he's kind of developed a bit of a nice point fighting style. And Maurice Greene actually has some nice volume as well. And offensively speaking, I like what Maurice Greene brings to the table. Similar to Holland, he's got that long man game. He's very active. It's just defensively is where I draw the line with Maurice Greene. He can give it, but he cannot take it as well as he can give it. And that's where I'm worried here against Greg Hardy, because Greg Hardy can take it, man. Greg Hardy went 3 rounds with Alexander Volkov in less than 10 pro fights into his MMA career. Like, that's a big deal, man. I mean, you see a guy like Walt Harris, who's been in the UFC forever. He can't even make it 2 rounds with Volkov. Greg Hardy's out here going the distance. I think Greg Hardy's a very talented athlete. And as long as he doesn't get, out volumed here, I think he's going to come out here and win this fight. And I think that, he can take the shots of Maurice Greene, but I'm not convinced Maurice Greene can take his shots. So I do see the first round being kind of competitive, but after that, I think Hardy kind of takes over, Dan, Tom.
Yeah, man, I wanted to go contrarian and go dog here, but when you look back at Maurice Greene's record, part of me was like, maybe he can outlast Greg Hardy, but like, no, from the beginning of his record to against UFC level comp, if he does win a decision, which is rare, it's a really greasy split decision. And yes, he was able to get a finish in the 3rd round in his last fight, but I think like Dan mentioned, it was more to exhaustion of Vellante. Whereas Hardy, I like that you mentioned point fighting because yeah, that's kind of the theme here. I actually, whether he's losing against Volkov or winning a low volume, boring heavyweight kind of slot fest against Jorgen, he's shown that he's got staying power for what that's worth. And at heavyweight against guys who tend to fall apart as the fight goes on, like Greene, that's worth a lot more. And you mentioned defense. That's totally true here. Here's the thing that worries me here with this fight, guys. I'm going to pick Hardy. And although usually I would be like, if Hardy, turns back and, goes to that earlier Greg Hardy and goes for the kill, maybe that would serve him best because Maurice Greene doesn't have defense and he can replicate his own Sergey Pavlovich win in that regard. However, that actually worries me more because Maurice Greene, not only does he not have kind of have bad defense, no offense to a guy that could just crush my hand, which he did one day in the Junkie Radio studio, George. But like what I noticed is that even if like when guys clash too fast against each other, he's so off balance and tall, and he's so off balance with his offense that he tips over. You don't even have to take him down. Like he will tip over. Now, here's what worries me about it. If Hardy gets aggressive, let's say he goes out there and tries to recreate the Pavlovich, tips Maurice Greene over in the 1st round while he's still fresh, while they're still dry, and then Hardy goes to follow up and falls into a submission. That is the way I see Hardy losing this fight, if he does. Not because he submitted Jean Vellante, but because he survived a round on the ground with Olenek before ultimately getting submitted. So I do think that he has a better ground game than Hardy. However, I'm going to pick Greg Hardy, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's a late finish or a decision here.
So, George, both these guys have definitely been evolving, no doubt about it. But whose progression have you been more impressed with?
Hardy's for me, I wouldn't say he's the easy call, but I just feel like he's the solid call. I feel like he's progressed more. And you both noted the two Russians that they each respectfully fought. I think both guys learned a lot from those fights. But I'm going to throw a wrench at you guys in just a second. So my pick is Hardy. I think Greene does have paths to victory. It all depends on just those early storms. I think Hardy was more susceptible to doing that earlier in his career, and I think he's become a smarter fighter as well. He's looking for those openings because he knows all he has to do is put his mitts on you and he will crush you. And like you guys noted, Greene doesn't always take shots very well, but if Greene can get past a certain point, I'm just wondering, could Greene maybe eke out 2 rounds or like Dan said, maybe catch him slipping and possibly submit him. I don't know. I don't find that to be, I guess, the likely scenario because I think Hardy's just a little bit more seasoned now. And here's the wrench, though. I think this is going to go under. So I don't know if we're even supposed to talk about over-unders. And it's a round and a half at -110. I think if you go over, it's -120. But really, if you think about it, I think this fight's going to revert back to earlier in their careers when they were going out there. And I think these guys know that getting the skin on the wall of the other guy would go a long way for these guys. Hardy, a little bit because of his age, he gets paid good money. And I think Greene wants to prove, hey, wait a minute here. I'm something I can be something in this division. So I think both guys are going to come out pretty fast. I think we're going to see some car crashes, like Justin Gaethje says. But I think I'm feeling safer by just taking the under and may the best man win. But I think it's going to be Hardy that gets the W.
So, gentlemen.
Also, guys, sorry, one last thing. Small cage as well for more action, just to put that out there.
Yeah. And the last 2 times we saw Hardy in that small cage was on Contender Series, went out there, knocked those guys out in under a minute each. So, yeah, you might be onto something, George. So definitely going to be paying attention to see what happens. So, gentlemen, in the lightweight division, we got Bobby Greene taking on Thiago Mosies. And Dan Tom, I know the fans remember you went out there and gave out your first max bet on Bobby Greene against Alan Patrick. And I mean, boy, he went out there. I know officially it was 30-20, 7 times 3. It was 30-25 as far as I'm concerned. But look, he looked amazing. He's on a 3-fight win streak. The only difference here, I mean, he's got another Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I'd say, Mosies is probably 15 years younger. But, I mean, that being said, though, do you view this as another opportunity to go big on Greene, or you think they kind of rightly adjusted the price? Give us your take.
Man, I think, Bobby Greene and Kevin Holland have been guys that I called before the pandemic era started to be fighters to watch out for, right? And again, go to linemovement.com. There are multiple articles proving me right and cashes on both guys. However, even though I'm admittedly not as confident, and I may even change my pick from the Kevin Holland pick, to answer your question, Dan, I am very confident still in Bobby Greene. I have not been sold on Thiago Mosies. He is another guy that has received hype like Bryce Mitchell, but not as much, and rightfully so, because even though he's young, he's got, the black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's got the outside Jiu-Jitsu accolades. He's got the father who brought him up in martial arts. He's got the American top team crossover. I'm not seeing enough considering all that math, man. I should be seeing bigger numbers. I should be more impressed by Mosies. I think, I haven't seen enough improvements in his stand-up or a process there to win rounds, much less finish. I know he's hit head kicks here or there, but Bobby Greene's been dancing and talking smack to guys like Edson Barbosa. He's been in the thick of the thickest division 155 for years. And I'm almost disappointed that, I think the bettors are right by piling them on. And again, -300s and over. There's nothing to pump my chest about in MMA. Anything can happen, folks. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that I don't believe and I don't blame the bettors for piling on Bobby Greene even higher, because I'm almost disappointed that not only does he not get a higher profile matchup, but although Mosies much more dangerous than Patrick, that being said, it's another Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter, like you said. And like we've seen it before, like Bobby Greene is underratedness becomes super underrated 10x cash my goddamn bets when you place him against a fighter that needs it on the ground, because not only does everybody underrate Bobby Greene's boxing, which is what wins him fights, but they underrate and forget about his wrestling and scrambling, which is impeccable. So I love Bobby Greene here.
George, I mean, you think that Mosies has had enough time to catch up? I mean, he's just 24. He's just a kid. So he's one of these guys that's going to be making these big leaps every single time we see him. But is that enough to go out here and beat the resurgence of Bobby Greene?
I don't think so. Dan nailed it in terms of how long Bobby Greene has actually been a really, really good fighter. And he's hit or miss. And I think that not only goes for fans, media, but probably the promotions that he's worked for. I think he's got this tag of just maybe being difficult or who knows what. He's had some injury problems, but if you go even before 2010, the Affliction era, like during those years, and then you go to the first run he had in the UFC, where I believe he took out Josh Thompson when Josh Thompson was still a top-notch fighter. And now seeing him have yet another resurgence, he's gone in these cycles, but along the way, he's always been pretty good. And I'm talking about everything. I mean, whether it's nullifying takedowns and keeping it more in the stand-up game, which is what he wants, the mental game. I like Bobby Greene here. And Mosies, look, obviously he's slick. Submitting Michael Johnson, much respect to Michael Johnson, but he gets submitted a lot. I think before that, you have to go back to LFA before Mosies may have gotten another submission. I don't think he's going to submit Bobby Greene. I think Bobby Greene is pretty seasoned in getting in the right positions. And I think Bobby Greene has also let go of any ego that he may have in terms of what it takes to win. I think the important thing is he's just happy that he's active and he's winning. And a lot of that respect is coming to him, because I think that means a lot to him. So I'm going with Bobby Greene in this one.
So, gentlemen, this is the interesting thing about Thiago Mosies. Okay, he's got the black belt in jiu-jitsu. He's got the youth. He's only like 24 years old. He's got the body. He's built. He's got the kicks. He kicks extremely hard. He's got knockout power. But there's something missing in the mental department and the confidence. And I've always thought this about Mosies, because I don't know if you all have seen his losses, not just in the UFC, but like even, the Jason Knight fight, the Robert Watley fight. Like when he loses fights, he completely shuts down and doesn't fight back. And that was almost the case in the Michael Johnson fight, which he won. So the fights start out, and the first 3 minutes of every Mosies fight, he kicks so damn hard, guys. But if you stand up to him and you keep walking forward, he'll stop fighting altogether. So basically, he'll get to a point where his activity drops to where he only throws like 1 strike per minute. So you just got to be careful. You'll be teeing off on the guy, and then after 30 seconds, he might throw one overhand. Just be careful that doesn't hit you clean, because he does hit hard. So I'll tell you what I'm worried about with Bobby Greene here. The only concern I have for Bobby Greene, and people actually mentioned the jiu-jitsu, because this guy is, apparently some world-class black belt. I'm not worried. He's not submitting Bobby Greene. I'm not worried about that. He's probably not even taking down Bobby Greene. Bobby Greene, you saw his last fight against another jiu-jitsu world champion. His wrestling, his grappling, everything is on point. So I have zero concern. Like, I would be shocked if Thiago Mosies came out here and submitted Bobby Greene. I'll tell you what I am concerned about, guys, though. That Bobby Greene fights with his hands down, and this guy Mosies actually kicks kind of hard. So like I think it could be like a case where like Mosies closes his eyes and accidentally knocks him out with a head kick. That's what I'd be worried about. You know what I mean? But aside from that, I think Mosies is going to get bullied. I think he's going to get grown man. I think that Bobby Greene is going to give him a tour of the octagon. I think he's going to teach him a vet lesson here. So just don't get caught with a head kick or an overhand right, and you win this fight. So I'm going to go with Bobby Greene as well.
The last note on that, Dan, because we parsed out something when we talked about Thiago Mosies last time. You mentioned Robert Watley, right? And what did we say? And although, Michael Johnson got submitted, which if you've been following Michael Johnson's career, no surprise. But Thiago Mosies does especially bad striking against southpaws, going all the way back to that Watley fight. And since, he's always struggled against southpaws on the feet, if not outright losing to them. Bobby Greene is an orthodox fighter, folks, but he's always been able to and consistently switched in southpaw looks, but B, more recently, and especially against grapplers to dissuade their shot looks, he is fighting a lot more southpaw. So something to watch for.
Very, very solid point. George, anything to add to that, or is it time to move on?
No, I think it's time to move on. I was definitely nodding my head at Bobby Greene. One thing that does scare me when I do watch him fight is, yes, those hands do go down. He seems to be one of the more savvy fighters in being able to do that. I think it's just part of the whole mind game. He's looking for openings. He's looking to counter. And again, he's not in love with really going out there and knocking you out or anything. If it happens, it happens. I think he's just as fine grinding out a decision. And like I say, I think he's in a happy spot right now because he's healthy and he's fighting frequently. But yeah, that is something to look out for, especially early on, is his hands. He keeps them a lot more down than I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, for sure. And you brought up the Josh Thompson fight, and shout out to Bobby Greene for cashing that plus 250 against Josh Thompson back in the day. That was one of my favorite underdog cashes. So definitely got a soft spot for Bobby Greene for sure. Now, guys, in the middleweight division, we got Sean Strickland taking on Jack Marshman. And interestingly enough, both guys are coming off a layoff. Strickland, I think it's like, a 2 or 3 year layoff. And he actually was in a bad motorcycle accident. Apparently, I mean, I don't know the extent, but I heard that he had to kind of like relearn how to walk. And it was pretty serious what he went through. And Marshman, I got a lot of respect for the guys. I think he might have been a Welsh paratrooper back in his day. So
Yep,
correct.
Anyone that serves, hey, he's got my full respect. But we got to break down these fights objectively. So this is actually Sean Strickland's middleweight debut, and similar to his past opponent, Tom Breeze, because they actually fought at 170 pounds back at UFC 199 the night that Bisping knocked out Rockhold. Now they're both up at 85s, and I think they're making the right call, because you see Strickland in some of these fights at 70, like he looks like too skinny, man. He's cutting too much weight. You saw that fight with Usman, and I heard he was 4% body fat for that fight. So I'm glad to see that he's moving up to 85s. I wish it was under better circumstances. I wish he didn't have to go through a fucking motorcycle accident to get him to move up, but at least he's moving up now. So I guess the talking point is, what's Strickland going to look like here? Because all due respect to Marshman, but I think we can agree that Strickland is the more skilled fighter across the board. It's just, will a diminished version of Strickland, is that still good enough to come out here and beat a guy like Jack Marshman? Because Dan Tom, I honestly do view this as a tune-up fight.
Yeah, I could totally see that, but he here's the worries for me. I agree with the positives. I like Strickland back at 85. Remember Tarzan Strickland with the long hair?
Yeah.
Hopefully we see more of that more aggressive, more umph. It felt like something was missing back to that point of him being too skinny, right? I'm totally with you. I don't think that's a bad thing. But here's the interesting part. Shouts to Aaron Bronstetter and the TSN MMA show. I was listening to their podcast, and Joe Valtellini, who is of course acclaimed kickboxer, one of the greats up there in Canada, corners a lot of UFC fighters. I don't know if he was down there with Malcolm Gordon or not, or which fighter he was with. But basically there was a story, or I don't know if it was him or there's someone they were interviewing. But basically down here at the PI, they couldn't stop noting how Sean Strickland was just asking them and everybody else just to spar. Like, he had no one around him. He's just kind of around there by himself, and he's asking everybody to spar. And they even share a funny anecdotal story about going to a Starbucks here in Las Vegas. And one of the baristas in the drive-thru going, "Are you with the guy in front?" Which was Sean Strickland, who went through before them. He's like, "Yeah, he was asking me to spar if I wanted to give him rounds." Like, apparently, like, Sean Strickland is asking everybody, including drive-through Starbucks baristas, if they can spar. So if we're, shout out to your tweet, Dan Levi, as far as, which chalk's going to crack. And I, of course, did my usual suspects joke, right? The 1995 film where it shows Kevin Spacey and all those guys in the lineup. And we're looking at chalk, who's probably going to crack. I'm picking Strickland here. Don't get me wrong. I'm not telling you to sprinkle on a guy like Marshman. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that I'm scared to play a guy like Strickland for that chalk. If, these are the training situations, whereas Marshman, yes, credit for him to serving, Dan, but lest we not forget, he also went Frank Duke's little Bloodsport reference there, and he actually abandoned ship a couple times, getting himself in trouble with his military outfit just to fight UFC fights. Now, the good part about that is this guy is used to fighting under weird terms, maybe not having sparring partners because he's having to train for these fights in secret, which is probably why it explains Marshman was missing weight back in the day. So in other words, it's one of those things where the negative could actually work for a positive as far as intangibles go. I'm going to pick Strickland. There's just a lot that worries me here.
Well, interestingly enough, you brought up Sean Strickland, and he likes to spar, and this is nothing new, man. He's had a reputation for a long time as being that guy that gets into a lot of gym wars, and you actually see on his IG he's out here sparring with Johnny Walker now. So the guy, he gives no fucks. And what's most interesting about that is that when he fights in the octagon, not sitting here saying that he doesn't go to war, but he actually kind of has a bit of like a pretty jab heavy style. So it's really interesting how that works, right? But man, I just feel like he's got Jack Marshman beat everywhere, unless the accident diminished him to a point where like he doesn't throw the same output anymore and he can't take the same shot anymore. But it's just Jack Marshman, his style, people view him as a brawler, and he kind of used to be back in the day, but I feel like these last few fights, he's kind of trying to run around on the outside and kind of trying to just, use a little bit of that boxing technique and kind of try to scrape out decisions like he did against John Phillips, which, by the way, I watched it the other day. I still think John Phillips actually won that fight, but
yeah.
Regardless of that, that style just doesn't give me confidence that he can beat a guy like Strickland. And I think that even if shit gets hairy on the feet, Strickland can always take this to the mat, and the fight might be over after one takedown. So it's really about what Strickland wants to do, but I still think he's got enough on the feet. It's just, George, I mean, I know the accident was serious, man, but was it serious enough to where he's gone below the level of Jack Marshman?
That's the thing we won't know. I mean, I can give you guys a little insight, not much, but a little bit. Well, first of all, you're right, Dan. He has had a reputation of having to move around from gyms. I think I've heard him, Team Quest, then down at King's MMA in Huntington Beach. I've seen him there, and he goes hard there because I was there on a Friday when they go really, really hard, light each other up, man, like the old shoot box days. And then I've seen him at Extreme Couture, and he's moving around fine. So yeah, the motorcycle accident, it's been about 2 years. I think it was 2 years yesterday. That from what I saw, like the flowing that I saw of those two workouts, he looked like he was okay. And here's the thing. Sean Strickland is moving up, but he's also fighting a guy. He's not fighting a guy that's like a natural middleweight as well. Marshman is an undersized middleweight, in my opinion. We've covered him since the Cage Warriors day. He is a paratrooper, like you said. But I think he was good enough to be a standout fighter at Cage Warriors, but in the UFC he's been a 500 fighter. Sean Strickland's also been a 500 fighter in the last 3 or 4 years, but he started off 5-1, and he was a terror out in the KOTC scene. So I think if he can get back to, I think this is the type of fighter where he can get the win, look good, and we'll see what he's got going forward, and we'll learn a lot about him as far as his athleticism and if that accident affected that. But I think Strickland definitely is a better fighter than Jack Marshman pretty much everywhere. I think it's going to show, but I don't think you can reasonably go up there, put the money down at minus 300, 330 or whatever he's at. You can't do that with a guy that hasn't fought in 2 years and somebody that's coming back from a serious accident. So that doesn't mean I'm taking Marshman either. I'm either going to sit it out. Or that's it. But if I'm just playing the whole give me the winner game, it's Sean Strickland.
Yeah, I feel you there. To me though, about the price, and I get y'all's hesitation, but to me, I don't really care that he's coming off a 2-year layoff, because to me, if he's still been training, if his skills are still intact, he can be coming off a 5-year layoff. He's better than Marshman across the board. To me, it's just, has he diminished? And I really appreciate your insight, George. You said you've seen him train firsthand. You've seen him in person, and you say it doesn't look like a guy that's coming off a bad motorcycle accident. It looks like a UFC level fighter.
Yeah, exactly. For training, yeah. And the Friday practice is pretty intense at King's MMA. And as far as what I saw at Extreme, that was the more recent one. He was moving around fine. So that's the most I can tell you.
That's enough for me to stay with my pick. It would have to be like a case where he's limping in practice, where he's not throwing anymore, and he has to clinch now, or whatever the case. It would have to be a completely different guy for me to pick Marshman. Doesn't sound like that's the case. I'm going Strickland. So last
Don't
but
blame
not
me.
least, in the lightweight division, we got Alexander Hernandez. He's taking on Chris Gruetzmacher. And man, I know I'm about to be a little bit harsh here, and you know, it's fine. You guys might disagree with me a little bit, but I kind of think that Alexander Hernandez is a complete and total fraud. And that's no disrespect. I think that he's a nice kid, this and that. But I think that the Beneil Dariush fight is one of the biggest flukes I've ever seen in all my years of watching this sport. I truly believe that if him and Beneil Dariush fight 10 times, that Beneil is winning that fight 9 out of the 10 times. I think that he caught Beneil at the absolute right time. I mean, listen, you guys know that when you're, fighting for the wrong reasons, you can have some shitty performances. And Beneil, I mean, he admittedly said that, he was trying to pay off his wedding. And you guys know the stress of, or maybe you don't know, but maybe you know people that have gotten married before, the stress of having to deal with an upcoming wedding. And Beneil was taking the fight for the money. He wasn't fighting for, when you see Beneil fighting for the right reasons, Beneil is one of the best guys in the world. Beneil wasn't fighting for the right reasons that night. Right place, right time. Congrats to Hernandez. But the reason I think that was a fluke is you saw 5 subsequent fights, and I thought he looked bad every single fight after that. I thought the OAM fight was a 50-50 fight. I thought it was really more about what OAM did wrong than what Alexander did right. And my point in case when I say that is that OAM got on top of Alexander Hernandez. All he had to do was stay on top to win the swing round. And instead, he drops back, goes for a leg lock, ends up on his back, loses that round. It's like you can't script that kind of stuff. So that was the swing round. So you give that fight to Hernandez. The Cowboy Cerrone fight. Listen, it's not about the fact that he lost to the guy with the most wins in UFC history, the guy with the most finishes, the guy with the most bonuses, the legend, the Hall of Famer. That part isn't the important part. The important part is, do you guys remember how much he disrespected Cerrone going into that fight? Do you guys remember how he was trying to act like he had a pocket thesaurus going into that fight? He's, the guy's like the guy that he was using a lot of big words going into that fight. He got demoralized. He didn't just get beaten as far as a result on a record. He got demoralized. He hasn't been the same since. He got the nice Texas judge's decision against Francisco Trinaldo, which we all thought he lost that fight. I mean, if you want any more examples about how bad Texas judging is, just go back to hashtag 3026 Bosch, because I know Dan Tom remembers when CB Dollaway and Tim Bosch fought in Texas, and CB Dollaway clearly won that fight. They scored 30-26 Bosch. It was unlike anything we've ever seen before. So, hey, he was a beneficiary of getting a Texas decision in Texas. He's from Texas. It was what it was. And then the next fight against Drew Dober did not knock him out. Alexander Hernandez said no mas. So I think that Beneil Dariush fight was a fluke. And I'm not one to sit here and discredit fighters. They're the ones that step in the cage. I'm only the guy that bets on the fights, this and that. We know this already, but I just have no evidence to support that, he's really that knockout machine that you saw in that Dariush fight, because every single fight after that has been extremely underwhelming. So I think this kid was a hype job the entire time, and I'll be the first one to admit it. Now, as far as Gruetzmacher, look, this is definitely a step down in competition. This is not, Cowboy Cerrone anymore. This is not Trinaldo. This is not Drew Dober. But I think Gruetzmacher is a little bit underrated, and I might be biased because he cashed for me at plus 150 against Joe Lozon, but I'll tell you what he brings to the table. He's one of these guys that can eat all your shots and keep walking forward. He doesn't break mentally. He's got a heavy sprawl. So if Alex Hernandez comes out here and blows the load in that first round, this second and third round could actually be really interesting, because Gruetzmacher is that guy that takes the ass whooping up front and then comes back in the second and third rounds. So that's why I kind of think this line is a little bit wide. But Dan Tom, I know I'm going to be the only one here making a case for Gruetzmacher, but I mean, do you think Hernandez cruises? Do you think he slightly edges? Like, what do you think the deal here is, man?
I don't know, man. At the current line, like, I want to make a case for Gruetzmacher as well, because I don't necessarily agree with that. You bring up some good points, and I know this is a feeling you've had for a minute, and it's been arguably proven right, and could arguably really be proven right, I think, this Saturday, depending on how Alexander Hernandez does. Now, I'm not gonna come as hard as my boy Hernandez there. He's done well for me. I don't mind the attitude. You need that confidence, but here's the thing: even though the confidence doesn't rub me the wrong way, to your point, Dan, with that Cowboy fight, man, I really, hate when matchmaking does this, and it's a brutal dog world in MMA in general, much less at the top level of the UFC. But we've seen it when they rush those guys too early, they take that loss. And it's not just like a split decision loss. It's like a stoppage, loss. It's a bad loss. It's a beat down, right? Or a beating. And that can really mess with the mental. That can really mess with that overall projection. That can really mess with someone's trajectory. So for Alexander Hernandez's sake, I almost, I hope you're wrong there, because like, man, that would really be a shame, because he does have a lot of potential from the way he moves, his athleticism. There's a lot to like. However, even though I'm leaning toward Alexander Hernandez, it's not a confident lean at all. I do like, however, I just went to his Instagram page. He spent this camp at Factory X Muay Thai, which I'm a big fan of. They've been doing well, and I would argue, they made their name with their bigger guys, like the 185ers, and they still have 185ers up there. But I think their lighter weight classes have quietly been on fire. That's where the stable seems really potent at Factory X. And before that, it appears he was working at Fight Ready. And I don't know if it was Fight Ready or MMA Lab. I know there was a lot of dissension and splitting amongst that camp. But I know that Gruetzmacher, I believe he used to work there, work with those camps. I know he split before he had this 2-year layoff, which is troublesome. Looks like he's been hanging out in Northern California. A little bit time here down in Vegas. I'm seeing Fred Senpai Zhao in his camp. But really, I've only seen Fred Senpai Zhao in anyone's camp is Roy Nelson's, which I don't know what that says. No offense to Big Roy, no offense to Fredson, obviously. I'm just saying, like, I don't know what kind of camp that he's put together. It really looks like a makeshift camp, which is my point, to kind of compound with that 2-year layoff. However, as a fight dynamic goes, Dan, you're right. If Gruetzmacher is going to win, it's going to be some type of case where we see Hernandez kind of blow the proverbial load early, which we've seen him suspect to do with his explosive style, and Gruetzmacher's grind will keep going. So Gruetzmacher's live, the value is there. So far, I'm leaning to the favorite.
George, it's interesting because you know how I mentioned that the Beneil fight was right place, right time. I think this fight actually might be right place, right time as well, because there's only been 2 fighters that have ever been kicked out of the MMA lab. Chris Gruetzmacher and Mackenzie Dern. So we don't know what Chris Gruetzmacher's been doing since he got that $50K bonus against Joe Lozon. And you know firsthand that some of these guys, when they get that $50K bonus, they go off the deep end, they come back, they feel like their next fight's already won. Oh, we don't have to train as hard. I got this $50K bonus. So I don't even know what to expect from Gruetzmacher, but I do know if he shows up anything like he did versus Lozon, he can at least make this a tough fight. The question is he going to give us that kind of performance?
It's interesting for you to kind of run through Hernandez. I remember everything you just said, the win over Dariush, getting checked by Cowboy Cerrone. I will give him credit for one thing, and because you're right, Dan, he came off, he had this vibe, not just after the Dariush fight, but just in general, very similar to Dominic Cruz, kind of like very arrogant, and in his interviews, he always sounded very proper with these big words and, scientific. And anyway, what I liked is that he took his medicine after the Cowboy loss. He realized, oh man, I shit the bed, I crapped the bed, and I like when a fighter can kind of at least recognize that. Begins the reparation process, the rehab of taking a huge loss, a loss that really could have catapulted him even further. But 400's a lot. And, as you were talking about the fight, I was playing it out. Would it almost make sense to leave the fight alone, but after a round, maybe live bet Grits? Let's see what Grits looks like after 2.5 years of the layoff. Let's see what kind of work he's been putting in. And let's see if he can take Alexander Hernandez, some of his best offense early on, and then maybe pour it on. I mean, you might get some pretty decent odds, especially if it's a soft 10-9, or maybe Hernandez does blow a load, gets a convincing 10-9, but he's also walking into rounds, 2 and 3 a little bit more exhausted. So I can't lay it on Hernandez for sure. I probably wouldn't back Grits. I think what I might do is sit back and live bet it and look towards betting Grits.
I like that. I didn't even think about that, but that's why we got George on the Line Movement MMA betting show. That's a fantastic point because that is, in my opinion, how he would win this fight. Like, if I'm picking Grits here, I'm not expecting, him to just walk through Hernandez. I think that he's going to have a comeback win. He's going to have to weather an early storm, but we have seen historically Hernandez does slow down. So that's what I'm curious about. And also, like we mentioned, we don't know what kind of shape Grits is in. That's why we don't want to quite back him pre-bet. We'd rather live bet. So fantastic point, George. Dan, Tom, what do you think about that?
Yeah, great point. I didn't think about that at all. But if there's any time to, pull out that live bet parachute play, this is kind of a fight to keep in the back of your mind as a potential target.
Definitely. Well, gentlemen, I truly appreciate y'all joining me on this very special edition of the Line Movement MMA betting show. It's been an absolute pleasure. You can follow my co-host Dan Tom at Dan Tom MMA. George, thank you so much for joining us. Tell the fans where they can follow you.
Thank you guys for having me. It was an honor to chop it up with you guys. Learned a lot from you two. And I can be found on social media at MMA Junkie George. So that's my Twitter and Instagram handle. And then I host MMA Junkie Radio Mondays and Thursdays. We are live on Sportscaster, SPORTSCASTR, and that audio then gets sent and published as in the audio form at any of the podcast platforms out there like Omni Studio, Stitcher, Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts. So check it out. It's twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays. But if you do want to catch us live, it's noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific over at Sportscaster.
Yes. So thank you again for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure. So for all the fans, make sure you'll follow us at line_movement. Subscribe to this video. Give us a like. We're also on Apple, on iTunes. So give us that 5-star review. You can follow me at Best Fight Picks. Want to give a quick shout out to our producer, Jordan, to everybody behind the scenes, Brian, Nick, Joe, Dan, James. Thank you guys as well. And everybody else on the Line Movement team. We truly appreciate y'all. To the fans, thank you so very, very much for supporting us. We're going to be back next week for the next fight card because actually finally it's going to be Glover Teixeira versus Thiago Maeda Santos. I know we've been wanting to see that fight happen for a very long time, and if it wasn't COVID times, that'd be a great main event in Brazil, but it's going out to Apex. You cannot complain about seeing Glover versus Thiago in the UFC Apex in the small cage without a crowd. You're going to hear the sounds of those shots, so we cannot wait. So thank you guys again. Make sure y'all stay safe, enjoy the fights, and we'll speak soon. Big thanks to George for joining us on the Line Movement MMA betting show. If you guys like what you see, make sure you give us a like, click any of the videos, and give us a subscribe today.